Hello Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. My name's J D Oswald, best known as the author of the Edinburgh-based Inspector McLean series of crime novels and the Constance Fairchild series, but I'm also known as J D Oswald, a cunning pseudonym, and under that name I've written the 5-book epic fantasy series, The Ballad of Sir Benfro, the first of which is this book, Dreamwalker. The series is published by Penguin. It's been out a little while now, and I thought I would read a section from the early part of Dreamwalker. I don't like reading stuff from halfway through a book or halfway through a series because I've no idea what's a spoiler or not. So I'll start from actually page 18 of Dreamwalker, so hardly anything's happened so far. This scene is from the point of view of Errol Ramsbottom, who's one of the main characters, along with his friend the dragon Sir Benfro, who hasn't appeared to Errol yet. And this is early in Errol's life, and it's an important life lesson for him. Errol knew as he rounded the corner that it was going to be a bad afternoon. The posse was waiting for him. "Hey, witch boy, where do you think you're going?" He didn't know who spoke the words, didn't really care. It could have been any of them. It was hard to distinguish one village boy from another at times, even though he had known them all from his first memories. They all had the same round, florid faces, the same mops of straw-blonde hair cropped in the same regulation pudding bowl style. Only the cloth and cut of their tunics and trousers gave any hint to who might be whose son, and even then everyone in Polperan was related. It was that kind of place. "I asked you a question, witch boy." Closer up, Errol could see who was being clever this time. Alderman Cluster's son, Trell. He was dressed in expensive fabrics, strong corded trousers that reached halfway down his shins and looked like he had long since grown out of them, a thick twill shirt 2 sizes too big, and a soft leather jacket of doe-hide brown. To Errol, dressed in his much-mended sackcloth trousers and shirt, it was a display of wealth, though it didn't stop Trell from clambering up trees, through hedges and across streams with the rest of his less well-dressed gang. It looked like they had taken the shortcut straight from school to head him off on his way home. Errol's heart sank. If that was the case, then he might as well get the torment over sooner rather than later. "I'm going home, Trell," he said. "You know, Hennis's cottage up the road a ways, where your mam had to bring your sister last autumn, to get rid of that little problem she had." Trell looked furious. His face turned redder still, and his hands clenched into fists. Now comes the bad part, Errol thought. At least the beatings were usually short. As the gang approached, he thought about turning and fleeing, but bitter experience had shown him that running only prolonged the torment, and exercise seemed to increase the gang's violent tendencies. He stood his ground as they approached, and was rewarded with a flicker of uncertainty in Trell's eyes. Like most bullies, the boy was a coward at heart. "You wanted something, Trell?" Errol said, trying to keep his voice calm, though it felt like his whole body was shaking. "Only I can ask my mam to whip up another potion if you need it." A shock ran through his whole body as the punch came from nowhere, collided with the side of his face. He had been expecting a kick, or at least a blow to the stomach, first, but by the time Errol had thought any of this, his knees had already given up, and he was on the hard-packed dry dust of the road. The gang stood around him laughing as Trell pulled back and landed a heavy kick in his stomach. Through his pain, all Errol could see was his leather satchel lying on the ground a few feet away. Its contents spilled out in the dirt, kicked this way and that by the circling boys. His prize, the book he had been reading all summer, lay broken-spined, trampled as if it was worthless. A strangely lucid part of him laughed at the realization that to most of his illiterate tormentors it might have been no more than bathroom stationery. Another carelessly placed foot ripped a skein of pages in two, spilling them about the path, and Errol's laughter suddenly turned to rage. Without thinking, without even knowing how he did it, he grabbed the nearest foot on an inward trajectory and pulled it hard towards him, rolling as he went. The laughter turned to alarm as someone yelped, and then a pile of bodies crashed to the ground all around him. Seeing Trell's face in the melee, Errol lashed out with his foot, feeling a cruel satisfaction as the soft leather heel met bony nose with a sickening crunch. "Ah, du boat by doze!" Trell screamed, clutching his face as thick red blood spurted from between his fingers. He scrabbled away from the fight, shuffling on his bottom like a baby, and Errol couldn't help himself from laughing. The rest of the gang, picking themselves up off the ground, looked over at Trell's pathetic figure and joined in. Someone grabbed Errol's arm, and for a moment he thought he was going to be hit again. Instead, he felt himself being pulled to his feet, his dusty shirt patted down with rough but not unkindly hands. Someone slapped him hard on the back, almost knocking him to the ground again. Turning, he saw Clun, the merchant's son, a huge grin on his face. "Nice one, Squirt," the boy said, genuine mirth on his face. "Perhaps you're not such a weed after all." Errol was confused. He couldn't work out what had happened. He stood, staring in a daze at the sobbing figure of Trell, who was still sitting on his backside in the dirt, still clasping his bleeding face, tears mixing with the blood and dust on his cheeks. The other boys were ignoring him completely now, chattering among themselves about what they were going to do next. School was over for the week, harvest was all but finished, and 2 days of autumn sunshine beckoned. There was exploring to be done, adventures to be had, and games to be played. Errol realized that he was being asked to join in. Someone pushed his satchel back into his hands, the torn pages of the book roughly shoved into the top. "What you say, witch boy? You want to play battle in the hayfield?" Clun asked. "It's Errol," Errol said, amused at his turn of fortune. "My name's Errol." "Whatever. You're the witch's boy. That makes you witch boy. You coming?" Errol considered his options. He had seen the games of battle played out in the fields in summers past. They were rough, usually ending in someone being hurt badly enough for Errol's mother to be called upon to heal them. Everyone involved got into serious trouble for the damage they caused. He longed to join in, indulge in some carefree rambunctiousness, but there were endless chores to be done, and his mother was no longer young, if indeed she ever had been. But if he passed up this opportunity, would it ever come again? He looked down at his satchel and the mess that was his book. Then he looked across to Trell. The alderman's son had turned very pale, and blood was still leaking from his nose. The green of his shirt was slicked all down the front with black, his expensive trousers speckled, and the soft suede of the jacket ruined. "I can't," Errol said, turning reluctantly back to Clun. "I'd better get Trell to my mam before he bleeds to death, and once I get home there'll be no coming back." "Suit yourself," Clun said, with a small shrug. Then he slapped one of the other boys hard on the back of the head and ran off whooping, pursued by the rest of the pack. Errol shouldered his bag and stooped to help Trell up. Something strange had just happened. It was as though their roles had reversed. How long had the alderman's son been bullying him? Years too long. And all it had taken was a kick to the face to turn it all around. "Libeth be," Trell snarled, causing Errol to step back. Some of the old fear was still there, but it was just a reaction. "At least tilt your head back a bit and put some pressure on the bridge," Errol said, "or you might bleed to death. Come to the cottage and my mam will fix it up in no time." "Don't get away with your stick doddle," Trell shouted, blood spittling out of the sides of his mouth as he scrabbled to his feet. "You'll pay for this, Darrell Drabsbottom." And with that, he ran off back towards the village. Errol noted with some satisfaction that he held his head back, one hand reaching up to the bridge of his nose as he went. So that's Errol Ramsbottom, who comes to all sorts of adventures, troubles and trials and tribulations as he grows up in this strange world of Goliath. I hope you've enjoyed that enough to look out the rest of the series. available in all good bookshops, some bad bookshops, on the interwebs. There isn't a day goes by I don't find someone pirating copies of it. Don't do that though. Don't download pirate copies. That's bad. So I think that's probably enough from me. And thank you to Super Relaxed Fantasy Club for inviting me to witter on at the camera. And yeah, have a good one.